My own birthday dinner. Everyone got a toast. Except me. My dad said, "Real men earn respect." My brother smirked. "He never does." The room laughed. I nodded and left quietly. 10 days later, they were calling non-stop, saying, "We made a mistake." But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The dining room smelled like pot roast and disappointment. Andrew Billings could identify both from the doorway before he even stepped inside. It was Sunday evening in late September, the kind where Pennsylvania autumn pressed against the windows with early darkness and the first real chill of the season. The Susquehanna River ran cold a mile east, cutting through farmland and memory, and Andrew had driven alongside it to get here, to his parents' house, to this table, to this feeling he'd carried his entire life. The feeling that he didn't belong. "There he is," his mother said, turning from the kitchen with a casserole dish in her oven-mitt hands. Carolyn Billings had aged the way women do when they spend decades managing other people's moods. Soft around the edges, careful in her movements, always watching to see who needed what. I was starting to worry. "Traffic," Andrew said, though there hadn't been any. His father sat at the head of the table already, reading something on his phone, a glass of water sweating onto the wood. Frank Billings didn't look up. He was 63, thick through the shoulders from decades of manual work, with gray stubble and the kind of permanent frown that made people think twice before approaching him. Andrew had spent his childhood reading that frown, learning when to speak and when to stay invisible. "Derek's in the bathroom," Carolyn said, setting the dish down on a trivet. She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. He had a long week. Big project at work. Andrew nodded and took his usual seat. Third from the end. Not at the head where Frank sat. Not beside him where Derek would take his place. Third from the end, where he'd sat since he was 8 years old and Derek was 6, and someone decided the pecking order without ever saying out loud. The house hadn't changed in 30 years. Same beige walls. Same family photos in mismatched frames on the mantel. Derek's high school graduation prominent. Andrew's tucked behind it. Same crack in the ceiling plaster above the light fixture that Frank always said he'd fix, but never did. The table bore the marks of 3 decades of meals. Water rings, knife scratches, a gouge near the corner where Derek had once thrown a fork during an argument Andrew couldn't even remember the cause of. "How's work?" Carolyn asked, because she always asked, though Andrew had learned years ago that she wasn't really listening to the answer. "Steady," Andrew said. "That's good." She bustled back to the kitchen, already moving on to the next task, the next moment of management. Frank still hadn't looked up from his phone. Derek emerged from the hallway, running a hand through his hair. He was 33, 2 years younger than Andrew, built like their father, but with their mother's easier smile. He'd put on weight since Andrew saw him last, maybe 15 pounds settling around his middle, but he wore it with the confidence of someone who'd never had to question his place at this table. "Andy," Derek said, dropping into the chair beside Frank. "Didn't think you'd make it. I told Mom I would." "Yeah, but you've been flaky lately." Derek reached for the breadbasket without waiting for grace. "Busy guy." Andrew didn't respond. There was no point. Carolyn returned with the pot roast, then green beans, then potatoes whipped with too much butter. She made enough food for 8 people, though only 4 would eat. She always did this, cooked like she was feeding an army, like abundance could somehow fill the spaces that conversation wouldn't reach. Frank finally set his phone face down on the table. "Let's eat." No prayer. Frank had stopped bothering with that years ago, right around the time the church changed pastors and a new one preached about grace instead of judgment. They ate in near silence at first, just the sound of forks on plates and Derek chewing too loudly, mouth slightly open, the way he'd done his entire life and no one had ever corrected. "So Derek was telling me about the new contracts," Carolyn said, glancing between her husband and younger son. "It sounds very promising." Derek nodded, swallowing. 3 new vendors signed on this month. "I've been working my ass off, sorry, Mom, but it's paying dividends. Revenue's up 18% over last quarter." Frank grunted approval. "That's what I like to hear." "Initiative." Andrew cut his pot, roast into smaller pieces than necessary, the knife scraping against his mother's good china. The meat was dry. It was always dry, but no one ever said so. "What about you, Andrew?" Carolyn tried again, her voice bright with false cheer. "Anything new?" "Not much. Still with the same company." "Yeah, that's good. Stability is good." Derek laughed, short and sharp. "Stability? That's one word for it." Andrew looked at his brother across the table. Derek was grinning at his own joke, not quite meeting Andrew's eyes. This was the dynamic now. This had always been the dynamic. Derek could take shots, land them, walk away clean. "Something funny?" Andrew asked quietly. "No, man. Just saying, you've been in the same position for years now?" "That's stable as hell." 3 years, right? 3. Derek took a long drink of water. "I just think, at some point you gotta push for more. Can't coast forever." Frank made a sound that might have been agreement. He was sawing at his meat with slow, deliberate strokes, the knife grinding. Andrew set down his fork. "I'm not coasting. I didn't say you were. You implied it." Derek held up his hands, still grinning. "Easy, man. I'm just talking. Don't be so sensitive." There it was. The word Frank had used Andrew's entire childhood. Sensitive. Like it was a diagnosis, a flaw in the wiring, something that made Andrew lesser than the men who could take a joke, take a hit, take whatever was thrown at them without flinching. Andrew picked up his fork again. His hands were steady. "I'm not sensitive. I'm just tired of the commentary." "What commentary?" Derek looked to their father, performing innocence. "Dad, you hearing commentary?" "I'm just asking about my brother's life." Frank finally spoke. "Both of you cut it out. It's Sunday dinner." But his eyes were on Andrew when he said it. Not Derek. Never Derek. They finished the meal in thicker silence. Carolyn tried to resurrect conversation twice, once asking about the weather, once mentioning a cousin's wedding, but both attempts died within seconds. Andrew ate mechanically, tasting nothing, counting minutes until he could leave without it being obvious. Then Carolyn stood, nervous energy crackling around her. "Almost forgot. Wait right there." She disappeared into the kitchen. Andrew heard the refrigerator open, heard her moving things around. His stomach sank with sudden understanding. She returned carrying a store-bought cake, chocolate with vanilla frosting, decorated with generic swirls and the words "Happy Birthday" in blue gel icing. Not his name, just "Happy Birthday." It was September 23rd, Andrew's 35th birthday. "I know it's not homemade," Carolyn said, setting the cake in the center of the table, her voice apologetic in that particular way she had. "But I wanted to do something special." Derek's eyebrows went up. "Oh shit, that's right. Happy birthday, Andy." Andrew stared at the cake. "Thanks, Mom." 35, she said, lighting candles with shaking hands. "That's a milestone. A real milestone." Frank pushed back his chair. The legs scraped against hardwood. Andrew watched his father stand, watched him look at the cake, at the candles, at the too bright kitchen light reflecting off his reading glasses. "Before we do the cake," Frank said. Everyone went still. Frank picked up his water glass. He held it slightly aloft, not quite a toast, but close. His jaw worked like he was chewing over words, deciding which ones to spit out. "I want to say something," he continued, "about responsibility, about stepping up when it matters." Andrew's chest tightened. He knew. Somehow he already knew. "Derek," Frank said, turning to his younger son, "you've shown real growth this year. Real maturity. Taking on the vendor accounts, bringing in new business. That takes guts. That takes follow-through." Derek's face was carefully neutral, but Andrew saw the satisfaction underneath. The glow. "Some people spend their whole lives talking about potential," Frank said, and now he was looking at Andrew, really looking at him for the first time all evening. Talking about what they're going to do someday. What they could be. The candles on the cake flickered. Carolyn stood frozen by the table, one hand half raised like she wanted to interrupt, but couldn't find the words. "Others actually do something," Frank finished. "They show up. They commit." To Derek, for carrying responsibility. He drank. Derek smiled and raised his own glass. The smile wasn't triumphant exactly, but it was close. It was the smile of someone who'd won something they didn't know they were competing for. Someone. Andrew couldn't tell who. let out a nervous laugh. Andrew sat perfectly still. His hands were in his lap beneath the table where no one could see them. His breathing was even. His face showed nothing. This was a skill he'd learned young. How to disappear while still sitting in the room. How to become so quiet that eventually people stopped noticing the knife they were twisting. Carolyn found her voice. "Frank, it's Andrew's birthday. I'm aware what day it is. Maybe we could." I said what I needed to say. Silence crashed down. The candles kept burning, wax starting to drip onto the frosting. Andrew counted them without meaning to. 35. She'd put 35 candles on a store-bought cake with no name on it. "You gonna blow those out?" Derek asked, and there was something in his voice now, something that might have been discomfort or might have been satisfaction. With Derek, it was hard to tell. Make a wish or whatever. Andrew stood. The movement was smooth, controlled. He pushed his chair in carefully, making no noise. "I'm tired. I should head out." "Andrew," Carolyn started. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. It was good. Stay for cake at least." "I'm not hungry." He walked to the doorway, picked up his jacket from the coat rack. Behind him, the dining room had gone silent again, but it was different now. Heavier, like weather about to break. "Andrew," Frank said, not loud but firm, the voice that expected obedience. Andrew stopped. He didn't turn around. "You gonna say something?" Frank asked. Andrew stood there with his jacket in his hands, facing the front door. He could smell the pot roast still, the cake, the particular smell of this house that had soaked into the walls over decades, cooking in old wood, and his mother's lavender air freshener that never quite covered the underlying sin of disappointment. "No," Andrew said finally. "I don't think I am." He walked out. No one followed. No one called his name. The front door closed behind him with a soft click, and he descended the porch steps into September darkness, into cold air that felt like relief. His truck was parked on the street where it always was, where he'd parked it hundreds of times for hundreds of Sunday dinners, just like this one. He climbed in, started the engine, pulled away from the curb without looking back at the house. The river road was empty this time of night. Andrew drove with his headlights cutting tunnels through rising fog, the Susquehanna black and invisible somewhere to his left. He knew this drive in his bones. Every curve, every pothole, every place where deer might suddenly appear in the road. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. He ignored it. The thing about being the quiet one, Andrew thought, hand steady on the wheel, was that people mistook it for acceptance. They mistook silence for agreement. They thought if you didn't fight back, you were content with your place at the bottom of the hierarchy. They were wrong. Andrew had stopped fighting years ago, but not because he'd accepted anything. He'd stopped fighting because he'd learned that some battles couldn't be won at the dinner table. Some battles required distance. Preparation. The long game. He wasn't sensitive. He'd never been sensitive. He was patient, and he was done explaining himself. The pattern had roots deeper than tonight's dinner. Andrew could trace it back to childhood if he wanted to, could follow the thread through 1,000 small moments that accumulated into something heavy and permanent. He was 7 when Derek was born, old enough to remember the shift in the house, the way attention suddenly flowed in a new direction. His mother with a baby on her hip, distracted, tired. His father's face softening in ways Andrew had never seen before when Derek grabbed his finger with tiny hands. At 7, Andrew had tried harder, brought home better grades, finished his chores without being asked, sat quieter at dinner so the baby could sleep. None of it mattered. Derek grew loud and confident, the kind of kid who grabbed what he wanted and threw tantrums when he didn't get it. Andrew watched his parents respond to this, not with punishment exactly, but with attention. Derek's needs became the organizing principle of the household. Derek's soccer games, Derek's school projects, Derek's teenage drama. Andrew learned to manage himself, got himself to school, made his own lunch, figured out homework alone because everyone was busy with Derek's needs, Derek's schedule, Derek's life. "You're so independent," his mother used to say, like it was a compliment, when really it was just acknowledgement that she'd run out of energy by the time she got to him. At 15, Andrew had tried to talk to his father once. Really talk. He'd stayed up late one night when Frank was in the garage, working on some project, and Andrew had gone out there with his hands shoved in his pockets and tried to say something true. I feel like you don't see me, he'd started. Frank had looked up from the workbench, confused. What? Like, you're always focused on Derek. And I get it. He's younger, he needs more attention, but is this about the truck? Andrew had been asking to borrow the truck for a school trip. That wasn't what this was about, but Frank had already decided. You can take the truck, Frank had said, turning back to his work. Just bring it back with a full tank. Dad, I'm not talking about the truck. Then what? You need money? You know where my wallet is. And Andrew had stood there in the garage, in the smell of motor oil and sawdust, realizing that his father genuinely didn't understand. Didn't understand that some things couldn't be solved with keys or cash. That Andrew wasn't asking for things, he was asking to be seen. He'd left the garage without finishing the conversation. Never tried again. By 18, Andrew had mapped the house's emotional geography. He knew when to speak and when to disappear. He knew that Derek's successes would be celebrated and his own would be acknowledged with distracted nods. He knew that showing emotion, anger, hurt, frustration, would get him labeled as sensitive or difficult, while Derek's emotional outbursts were just passion or intensity. So he'd stopped showing emotion. At 21, Andrew had left, packed his clothes into a used Chevy sedan he'd bought with money from construction jobs. Told his parents he was heading west to find work. His mother had cried. His father had shaken his hand and said, "Don't come back until you've made something of yourself." Andrew hadn't come back for 3 years. He'd worked construction in Ohio first, framing houses in summer heat that left him dizzy. Learned how buildings went together from the ground up. Then warehouse work in Illinois, managing inventory systems, discovering he had a talent for logistics, for seeing how things move through space, how to optimize flow. At 25, he'd gotten hired as a warehouse supervisor in Indiana. At 27, a logistics coordinator. At 30, he landed a position with a regional supply chain company that distributed materials to construction firms across 3 states. He'd moved back to Pennsylvania only because the job was good and the location made sense. Not for family, not for home. When he'd first returned, his mother had thrown a small dinner. Just the 4 of them. Derek was 28 then, working for their father's building supply business, managing deliveries. He'd greeted Andrew with a bear hug and said, "Welcome back, man. Heard you're doing some supply chain thing." "Yeah," Andrew had said. "That's cool. Dad and I have been killing it with the business. We should talk shop sometime." They never did. Frank had asked Andrew once about his work early in that first year back. "This logistics thing, what's it pay?" Andrew had given him a number. Frank had grunted. "That's decent. Not great, but decent." It was more than Derek made. Andrew didn't mention that. He'd learned that facts didn't change feelings. Over the next 5 years, Andrew watched his career progress in quiet increments. He wasn't flashy about it. Didn't brag. When family asked how work was going, he said fine. When they pushed for details, he gave them the minimum. They'd stopped asking after a while. Meanwhile, Derek got louder. His stories at Sunday dinners grew more elaborate. This big deal he'd closed, that difficult client he'd won over. Frank would lean back in his chair, nodding approval, sometimes clapping Derek on the shoulder. Andrew noticed things, though. Small things. Derek's car wasn't as nice as he claimed. The big deals never seemed to result in visible success. The building supply business wasn't growing the way Derek suggested in his stories. But Andrew stayed quiet, watched, learned. That was the thing about being invisible. You saw things other people missed. Now, driving through fog toward his rental house 10 miles from his parents, Andrew felt something shift in his chest. Not anger exactly. Anger was hot and quick. This was colder, more certain. He'd spent 35 years trying to earn a seat at that table, trying to earn his father's respect, his mother's focused attention, his brother's acknowledgement as an equal. He was done trying. His phone buzzed again. Then again. Andrew pulled into his driveway, a small house he rented on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but it was his, and checked the screen. Mom calling. He let go to voicemail. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. Andrew didn't turn on lights, just stood in his kitchen in his jacket, listening to nothing, feeling the absence of noise like a physical presence. His phone lit up with a voicemail notification. He played it. Carolyn's voice came through, tight with tears. Andrew, honey, I'm so sorry about dinner. Your father didn't mean. He wasn't thinking. You know how he gets. Please call me back. It's your birthday. We can do something tomorrow, just you and me. Please. Andrew deleted the message. He made himself a drink, whiskey, neat, cheap stuff that burned going down, and sat at his kitchen table in the dark. Through the window, he could see streetlights haloed in fog, could see the neighbor's porch light, could see the ordinary nighttime geometry of a small town where nothing much happened, and people lived their whole lives in the same 3-mile radius where they'd been born. His phone lit up again. Text from Derek this time. That was awkward, LOL. You okay? Andrew stared at the message. The casual LOL. The lazy grammar. The performance of concern that cost nothing and meant less. He didn't respond. Another text arrived while he was staring. Dad's dad, you know? Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. As if there were any other way to take your father praising your brother at your birthday dinner. As if 35 years of this pattern wasn't, by definition, deeply personal. Andrew finished his drink. Made another. The thing was, he wasn't shocked. He'd seen it coming the moment his mother lit those candles. Maybe before. Maybe he'd seen it coming since birth, since the moment he'd been born too quiet, too reserved, too unlike the man Frank Billings wanted as a son. What surprised him was how calm he felt. No tears. No shaking hands. No urge to call them back and yell or explain or to defend himself. Just cold, clear certainty settling into his bones like ice crystallizing on a river. He was done. Andrew didn't call them the next day, or the day after that. He went to work Monday morning like always, drove the familiar route to the industrial park where his company leased a large warehouse facility. Clocked in, checked inventory reports, coordinated shipments, had a meeting about implementing new tracking software, ate lunch alone in his office, going through emails with methodical attention. Normal. Professional. Fine. His boss stopped by around 3. Helen Granger, 52, sharp-eyed, a woman who'd clawed her way up from warehouse floor to regional director. She leaned against Andrew's doorframe and said, "The Milwaukee account signed the contract. You call that right?" "Good," Andrew said. "I'm putting you down for the quarterly bonus." "Well done." She left. Andrew returned to his spreadsheets. At home that evening, more missed calls. More texts. He read them all, absorbed the content, deleted nothing. Just let them accumulate like evidence. "Mom, please call me. I love you. Happy belated birthday. Derek, dude, come on, don't be like this. Mom again. I made your favorite cookies. Stop by anytime." Nothing from Frank. Of course not. Frank Billings didn't apologize or reach out or bridge gaps. Frank Billings stood at the head of the table and expected the world to arrange itself around him. Tuesday became Wednesday. Wednesday became Thursday. Andrew established a new routine. Work. Home. Silence. He cooked simple meals for himself, did laundry, watched television without really seeing it. His phone kept buzzing and he kept ignoring it. Friday afternoon, his mother called his work number. Andrew Billings speaking. He answered automatically. "Andrew, thank God." Carolyn's voice cracked with relief. "I've been trying to reach you all week." "I know." "Then why?" She stopped herself. "Never mind. Can we talk? Please? I just want to hear your voice. We're talking now. I mean really talk. Not like this. Can you come to dinner Sunday?" "We can." "No." Silence on the line. Then, "Andrew, please. I'm sorry about what happened. Your father is sorry too. He just doesn't know how to say it." "Is he there right now?" "No, he's at work." "Then you don't know if he's sorry." "I know my husband." "Mom." Andrew kept his voice even, professional, like he was talking to a vendor about delayed shipments. "I appreciate the call. I need to get back to work now." "Andrew." He hung up. Helen walked past his office 5 minutes later, glanced in, saw whatever was on his face, and kept walking. Smart woman. The weekend arrived. Andrew cleaned his house, worked out at the gym, bought groceries, acted out the rhythms of normal life. His phone went quiet Saturday, like his family had collectively decided to give him space or had run out of things to say into the void of his silence. Sunday morning, single text from Derek. "You gonna show today?" Andrew didn't answer. He spent the afternoon replacing a leaky faucet in his bathroom, focusing on the simple mechanics of washers and pipe joints and water pressure. Physical problems with clear solutions. No ambiguity. No emotional subtext. Just tools and effort and things that either worked or didn't. That evening, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him. Hello. Andrew Billings? Male voice, vaguely familiar. Speaking. It's Tom Hendricks. We met at that supply chain conference in Pittsburgh last year. Andrew placed him. Tall guy, worked for a competing regional distributor. They talked briefly about logistics software over watered-down conference coffee. I remember. Good. Listen, I'm calling because your name came up in a discussion we were having about expansion opportunities. We're looking at growing our vendor network, and we need someone who understands the Pennsylvania market. Someone with connections. You interested in having a conversation? Andrew carried the phone to his living room window. Outside, dusk was settling over the neighborhood. Streetlights coming on. People walking dogs. Ordinary life proceeding without pause. What kind of conversation? He asked. The kind where we talk about growth potential. Compensation. Maybe partnership down the line if things go well. No pressure, just exploratory. But I remembered you seemed like someone who knew what he was doing. Someone who might be looking for more than what he's got. Andrew watched a kid ride past on a bicycle. No helmet. Going too fast for the twilight visibility. Watched the kid disappear around a corner, unharmed. Send me some information, Andrew said. I'll take a look. Fantastic. I'll email you Monday morning. Thanks for taking my call. They hung up. Andrew stood at the window a while longer, phone in hand, thinking about timing and coincidence and how life sometimes offered you options right when you needed them most. Monday morning, 10 days after his birthday dinner, Frank finally called. Andrew was at his desk when his phone lit up with his father's name. He stared at it through 4 rings, then answered. Andrew. Frank's voice was gruff, uncomfortable. We need to talk. About what? Don't play games. You know about what? Andrew leaned back in his chair. Outside his office window, warehouse workers were loading a truck, moving in practice choreography. I'm not playing games. What do you want to talk about? About Sunday. About you ignoring your mother for 10 days. About you acting like a child. Something cold flickered through Andrew's chest. Acting like a child. That's what I said. Your mother's worried sick. Derek's been trying to reach you. You can't just disappear because your feelings got hurt. My feelings, Andrew repeated. Look, I don't have time for this. Whatever happened at dinner, it wasn't that serious. We eat together every Sunday. That's what family does. You're going to let one bad night ruin 35 years. Andrew almost laughed. Instead, he said, It wasn't one bad night, Dad. Here we go. Here comes the list of grievances. I don't have time. You never do. Silence. Sharp and crackling. Watch your tone, Frank said, low and dangerous. Or what? Or, Frank stopped. Recalibrated. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted to something almost cajoling. Look, we need to discuss something important. Business matter. Can you meet us? Me and Derek. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. There's a diner off Route 15. The one with the... I know which one. So you'll come. Andrew looked at his computer screen. Looked at the email from Tom Hendricks that had arrived that morning, laying out preliminary details about the expansion opportunity. Looked at the spreadsheet showing his current company's quarterly performance. Looked at the life he'd built in careful increments without his family's help or acknowledgement. Why, he asked. Why what? Why do you need to meet? That's something we discuss in person. Give me a preview. Frank made an exasperated sound. Andrew, for once in your life, can you just show up when you're asked? Can you do that one simple thing? Andrew counted to 5. Fine. 7 o'clock. The diner. Good. That's good. We'll see you then. Frank hung up without saying goodbye. Andrew sat in his office afterward, listening to warehouse sounds filter through the door. Forklifts beeping, men shouting coordinates, the clang of metal on metal. Normal sounds of industry. The sounds of work that got done because people showed up and did their jobs without drama or emotion. He opened his email and typed a response to Tom Hendricks. Let's schedule a meeting. I'm interested in learning more. Then he went back to work. The diner was one of those places that hadn't changed since 1987 and probably looked exactly the same in 1967. Vinyl booths with cigarette burns patched with duct tape, Linoleum floors worn smooth from decades of traffic, fluorescent lights humming overhead with insect electricity. It smelled like burnt coffee and fry grease, and the waitress behind the counter looked exhausted in a way that suggested this wasn't just end-of-shift tired, but rather accumulated lifetime tired. Andrew arrived at 6:55. He'd learned punctuality from his father, one of the few lessons that actually took. Frank always said early was on time. On time was late, and late was unacceptable. Frank and Derek were already there, sitting in a corner booth. Of course they were. They'd probably arrived at 6:30 just to get settled, to control the space, to make Andrew come to them. Andrew walked over without hurrying. Derek saw him first and raised a hand in greeting. Frank just watched, his face unreadable in the harsh overhead light. "Hey man," Derek said as Andrew slid into the booth across from them. "Glad you came." Andrew didn't respond, just met his father's eyes and waited. The waitress materialized beside the table. "Coffee, please," Andrew said. "Same," from Derek. Frank waved her off. He already had a cup, nearly empty, heavily creamed. The waitress poured coffee with mechanical efficiency and disappeared. The cup was warm in Andrew's hands, the coffee bitter and over-extracted. He drank it anyway. "So," Frank began, then stopped. He looked uncomfortable, a rare expression on his face. Discomfort didn't suit Frank Billings. He was built for certainty, for declarative statements and closed cases. "Let's not drag this out," Derek said, leaning forward. "We've got a situation at the business. It's complicated." Andrew sipped his coffee and said nothing. Derek glanced at Frank, got no help, continued. "You remember I've been managing the vendor accounts? New contracts, new clients, expanding the network. You mentioned it at dinner, right?" "Yeah. Well, that's all been going great. Really great. But there's been he searched for a word, some hiccups with the payments. Cash flow stuff. You know how it is." "I don't," Andrew said. "Explain." Derek shifted in his seat. "Look, it's not a big deal. It's just that we extended credit to some new clients to sweeten the deals, and a couple of them have been slow to pay. So now we're in this temporary situation where our vendors are asking for payment guarantees before they'll ship more materials, and it's creating this bottleneck." Andrew set down his coffee cup. "How much?" "What? How much are you in the hole?" Derek's jaw tightened. "It's not a hole. It's a timing issue." "How much?" Frank finally spoke. 180,000. Roughly. The number sat on the table between them like a grenade. Andrew looked from his father to his brother and back. Derek had gone red in the face. Frank looked like he'd swallow glass. $180,000, Andrew repeated. "In 3 months?" "It's not all Derek's fault," Frank said, though his tone suggested he believed otherwise. "The market's been tough. Everybody's dealing with slow payments. Are they dealing with $180,000 problems?" "It's not a problem," Derek snapped. "It's a temporary situation that requires some creative management." Andrew almost smiled. "Creative management. Yeah, that's why you're here. We thought," Derek looked at Frank again, back at Andrew. "We thought maybe you could help." "Help how?" "You work in supply chain, right? You've got connections with vendors, other distributors. We thought maybe you could put in a word, help us extend some payment terms, or maybe connect us with vendors who'd work with us during this transition period." Andrew leaned back against the cracked vinyl. The diner's air conditioning was running too cold, fighting against September humidity outside. A man at the counter was arguing with the waitress about his bill. Somewhere in the kitchen, dishes clattered. "So you want me to use my professional relationships to bail out Derek's mistakes," Andrew said. "They're not mistakes. What would you call them?" Derek's face went from red to purple. "Look, I don't need your judgment right now, okay? I need your help. That's why we called you. Because you're family and family helps each other." "Family." Andrew tested the word. Let it sit in his mouth like something bitter. "When's the last time you helped me with anything?" "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like." Frank cut in, his voice hard. "This isn't the time for your grievances, Andrew. We're here to discuss business. You got something useful to contribute or not?" Andrew looked at his father. Really looked at him. 63 years old, weathered from outdoor work and anger, gray stubble and hard eyes that had never once softened when they looked at Andrew. This man had spent 35 years teaching Andrew exactly where he stood in the family hierarchy, and now he was sitting here asking for help like that history didn't exist. Tell me something, Andrew said quietly. Did it ever occur to you to ask me about my work? Before tonight, before you needed something, did you ever once ask me what I actually do? Frank's expression didn't change. You work logistics, supply chain. You said that. I'm a senior logistics coordinator for the largest regional distributor in 3 states. I manage vendor relationships worth over $20 million annually. I've increased efficiency in our supply chain by 37% in 2 years. Last quarter, I negotiated contracts that saved my company $600,000. Derek blinked. What? I was promoted to senior coordinator 3 years ago, then to regional account manager 18 months ago. I'm in line for director position next year, but you wouldn't know that because you never asked. Silence filled the booth. Frank's expression had shifted, not to pride or acknowledgement, but to something more calculating. Andrew watched him process this information, watched the gears turn. Well, Frank said slowly, that's good. That's real good. Makes this even better then. You've got more pull than we thought. And there it was. No acknowledgement of a larger point. No recognition of decades of dismissal. Just immediate pivot to how Andrew's success could serve their needs. Andrew felt something crystallize inside him. Something cold and final. I'm not helping you, he said. Derek jerked forward. What? I'm not using my professional reputation to fix your problems. Are you serious right now? Derek's voice rose. We're your family. You're people who share my last name. That's not the same thing. Oh, here we go, Derek said, throwing his hands up. Here comes the pity party. Poor Andrew. Nobody appreciates him. Everyone's so mean. Shut up, Derek. The words came out flat and hard. Derek shut up. Even Frank looked surprised. Andrew continued, his voice even. You screwed up. You took a business that's been running for 30 years, and you screwed it up in 3 months because you're reckless and overconfident, and you've spent your entire life being told you're special when you're actually just loud. You don't talk to your brother that way. Frank started, but Andrew cut him off. And you, Andrew shifted his attention to his father. You taught me everything I needed to know, just not the lessons you meant to teach. Watch yourself. You taught me that hard work doesn't matter if you're quiet about it. You taught me that asking for recognition is weakness. You taught me that some people get praise just for showing up while others get ignored no matter what they achieve. You taught me that family isn't about love or support. It's about hierarchy. Frank's hands had curled into fists on the table. You finished. Not yet. Andrew pulled out his phone, opened his email, found a message from Tom Hendricks. I'm looking at a job offer from your biggest competitor. They want me to help them expand into your territory. They're offering 60% more than I make now, plus partnership potential. Derek's eyes went wide. You wouldn't. Why wouldn't I? Because we're family. Right. Family. Andrew put his phone away. Family who forgot my birthday. Family who uses it as an opportunity to praise someone else. Family who hasn't asked about my life in 5 years unless they needed something. Frank leaned forward, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You're making a mistake. Am I? You walk away from us. You're walking away from everything. Your mother, your history, your name. My name, Andrew repeated. The name you made sure meant nothing. I think I'll keep it anyway. He stood up. Derek reached across the table like he might try to grab Andrew's arm. But something in Andrew's expression stopped him. Think about what you're doing, Frank said. I have been. Andrew pulled out his wallet, dropped a 20 on the table for the coffee he'd barely touched. For 35 years, actually. This is me done thinking. You walk out that door. What? You'll disown me? You'll tell people I'm ungrateful? Go ahead. Tell everyone how your son succeeded without your help and refused to fail with it. Frank's face had gone deep red. You're making a mistake. The mistake was showing up tonight, expecting something different. Andrew turned and walked toward the door. Behind him, Derek was saying something urgent to Frank, their voices rising in argument. The tired waitress watched Andrew leave with the expression of someone who'd seen this scene play out 1,000 times with different actors. Outside, The parking lot was lit by a single buzzing street lamp. Moths circled it in frantic orbits. Andrew's truck was parked at the far end, and he walked toward it with steady steps, waiting for his hands to shake or his breath to catch or some physical manifestation of what had just happened. Nothing came. He felt calm, clear-headed. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and checked his phone. Message from his mother. Derek said you're meeting Frank tonight. Please be kind. Please remember we love you. Andrew deleted it. Another message from Tom Hendricks got your response. How's Thursday afternoon for a meeting? Could do lunch in Harrisburg if that works. Andrew typed back, Thursday works. Send me details. He drove home along the river road, watching fog rise off the black water, thinking about choice and consequence and the strange relief of burning bridges you should have burned years ago. The next morning, Andrew woke early. The eastern sun cut through his bedroom window at an angle that suggested autumn was taking hold for real now. He made coffee, scrambled eggs, ate standing at the counter while reading news on his phone. Normal. Fine. His mother called at 8:15. He didn't answer. She called again at 8:30, then again at 9. At 9:15, she left a voicemail, her voice thick with tears. Andrew, honey, Derek told me what happened. Please, can we just talk? I don't understand why you're being this way. Whatever your father said, he didn't mean it. He's just proud, and he doesn't know how to apologize. Please call me back. Please, baby. It's breaking my heart. Andrew listened to the whole message, then deleted it. He understood his mother's pain. He did. Carolyn Billings had spent 40 years smoothing over Frank's rough edges, translating his harshness into intentions, managing the emotional labor of keeping a family intact that should probably have fractured decades ago. But that wasn't Andrew's responsibility anymore. He went to work, had a productive morning reviewing quarterly projections. At lunch, he drove to a small restaurant in Harrisburg where Tom Hendricks was waiting in a booth by the window. Andrew, Tom stood and shook his hand. Firm grip, direct eye contact. Thanks for making the drive. No problem. They ordered food, made small talk about traffic and weather and the general state of the supply chain industry. Then Tom got down to business. Here's where we are, he said, pulling out a tablet and opening a presentation. We've been dominant in Ohio and West Virginia. Good penetration in western Pennsylvania. But the central and eastern parts of the state are locked up by your current company and he paused, by Billings Building Supply. My father's company, Andrew said. Yeah, I know. That's actually one reason I wanted to talk to you. You understand that market from both sides. Consumer side through your dad, distribution side through your current role. I'm listening. Tom walked him through the expansion plan. It was comprehensive, well thought out, aggressive. They wanted to move into central Pennsylvania with competitive pricing and faster delivery times. They'd already secured warehouse space and hired logistics staff. What they needed was someone who understood vendor relationships, who could smooth the transition, who could bring credibility to their expansion. We're prepared to offer you regional manager position, Tom said. Base salary $95,000, profit sharing, full benefits, company vehicle. You'd report directly to me, and you'd have full authority over the Pennsylvania expansion. If you hit targets, we're talking director position within 2 years. Andrew cut into his sandwich. That's a substantial offer. You're a substantial asset. I've done my homework on you, Andrew. People respect you in this industry. They trust you. That's worth more than experience sometimes. And Billings Building Supply? Tom set down his fork. I won't lie to you. Their competition. Moving into this market means we'll be going after their accounts. Some of their vendors might switch to us if we offer better terms. That's business. It would hurt them. Probably. You're asking me to help damage my family's company. I'm asking you to do your job well. If that has collateral consequences for a competitor, that's not personal. That's market dynamics. Andrew ate his sandwich, thinking. Tom Hendricks was smart enough not to push, to let silence do its work. Finally, Andrew said, I need to think about it. Fair enough. Take a week. But I should tell you, we're interviewing other candidates. You're our first choice, but we can't wait forever. They finished lunch, shook hands in the parking lot. Andrew drove back to his office with Tom's offer sitting heavy in his mind, not with doubt exactly, but with the weight of understanding what saying yes would mean. That evening, his brother showed up at his house. Andrew heard the truck pull into his driveway around 7, heard the door slam, heard footsteps heavy on his porch. The doorbell rang. He considered not answering, then decided that would only postpone the inevitable. Derek stood on the porch with his hands shoved in his pockets, looking younger than 33 in the fading light. Uncertain, nothing like the confident swagger he carried at Sunday dinners. "Hey," Derek said. "What do you want? Can I come in?" "No." Derek flinched but held his ground. "Fine. We'll talk here then. I need you to understand something." "I understand plenty." "No, you don't. You're pissed, I get it, but you don't understand what's actually at stake here." Andrew leaned against the doorframe. "Enlighten me." Dad's business is everything to him. Everything. It's not just about money or legacy or whatever. It's his whole identity. If it fails, Derek stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. It'll destroy him, man. Completely. Then he should have managed it better. He trusted me. Bad judgment on his part. Derek's jaw worked. I made mistakes. I know that. But I can fix them if I have time. If we can get through this cash flow problem, I can turn it around. I just need my help. Yeah, your help. Andrew looked at his brother. Really looked at him. Saw the fear underneath the bravado. Saw someone who'd spent his entire life being told he was special and was now confronting the possibility that maybe he wasn't. Part of Andrew, a small part he didn't like very much, felt satisfaction at that fear. "You've spent your entire life getting everything handed to you," Andrew said quietly. "Every advantage, every benefit of the doubt, every second chance. And now you're standing on my porch asking for more. I'm not. That's not fair." "Fair." Andrew laughed, short and sharp. "You want to talk about fair? At my birthday dinner, Dad raised his glass to toast you. At my birthday. I didn't ask him to do that. But you didn't stop him either. You smiled. You accepted it like it was normal." Derek looked away. "I didn't know what else to do. You could have said something. You could have acknowledged how screwed up that was. You could have, for once in your life, considered someone other than yourself." "You're right." Derek's voice cracked slightly. "You're right, okay? I should have said something. I've been a shitty brother. I know that. But this isn't just about me. It's about Mom, too. About Dad. About keeping the family together." "The family," Andrew repeated. "The one that spent 35 years showing me exactly where I rank." "Andrew, come on. Go home, Derek. Just listen. I'm done listening. I'm done being the quiet one who lets everyone else have their way. I'm done apologizing for taking up space in my own life." Derek's hands came out his pockets, palms up, pleading. "So what? You're just going to let us fail? You're going to help some competitor destroy Dad's business out of spite?" "Out of self-interest," Andrew corrected. "There's a difference. That's cold, man. That's really cold. I learned from the best." They stared at each other across the threshold. The sun had set fully now, and moths were starting to circle Andrew's porch light. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. "I'm sorry," Derek said finally. "For all of it. For every time I was a dick, every time I didn't stand up for you, every time I let Dad treat you like you didn't matter. I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air. Andrew examined it, turned it over in his mind, looked for sincerity or manipulation. Found both. "I believe you," Andrew said, "but it doesn't change anything." "Why not?" "Because I'm not interested in being the person who fixes your problems anymore. I'm not interested in earning my place at a table where I was never welcome to begin with." Derek stood there a moment longer, then nodded slowly. Okay, I get it. But when you make this choice, when you decide to help destroy what Dad built, don't pretend it's just business. Don't pretend you're taking the high road. I'm not pretending anything. This is exactly what it looks like." "Yeah." Derek turned to go, stopped on the first step. "For what it's worth, you were always smarter than me. I knew that. I think Dad knew it too. Maybe that's why he never liked you as much. You scared him." He walked to his truck without looking back. Andrew stood in his doorway, watching tail lights disappear down the street. Derek's last words echoing in his head. You scared him. He'd never considered that. Never imagined that Frank's dismissal might be fear rather than disappointment. The idea should have felt like revelation, but it just felt like more wasted years chasing the wrong understanding. Inside, Andrew poured himself a drink and pulled up Tom Hendrick's email on his laptop. Read through the offer again. Looked at the numbers, the territory map, the projected growth charts. His phone rang. Mom again. This time he answered. Andrew, thank God, Carolyn said, her relief immediate and overwhelming. Derek said he talked to you. He said you were firm. But I wanted to call myself. I wanted you to hear it from me. Hear what, Mom? That I love you. That I've always loved you. That whatever's happened between you and your father, whatever's happened with Derek, that doesn't change how I feel. Andrew closed his eyes. I know you love me. Then please help us. Not for Frank. Not for Derek. For me. I'm asking you as your mother. Mom, I know they've hurt you. I know I've hurt you too by not standing up more, by always trying to keep peace instead of doing what was right. I know all of that. But this business is our livelihood. If it fails, we lose everything. The house, the savings, everything. The house is paid off. The second mortgage isn't. Derek convinced Frank to take one out for the business expansion. If the business fails, her voice broke. We'll lose the house, Andrew. We'll lose it. Andrew opened his eyes, stared at his ceiling, processed this new information. They'd mortgaged the house. Derek's mistakes weren't just threatening the business. They were threatening his parents' home. That was a stupid decision, he said. I know. I told Frank not to do it. But Derek was so sure, so confident it would work out. And Frank wanted to believe in him. Wanted to believe in him. The words landed like stones. Mom, I can't fix this. You can. Tom Hendrick's company. Derek said you're talking to them. Don't do that. Please. Stay where you are, or find something else, but don't help them come after us. How did Derek know about Tom Hendrick's? Silence. Then, quietly, I don't know. He just mentioned it. Small town, Andrew thought. Someone saw them at lunch. Word traveled. Nothing stayed private in towns like this. I have to do what's right for me, Andrew said. I know you do. But I'm asking, begging, for you to consider what's right for your family too. You mean the family that forgot my birthday? That one. Carolyn made it sound like she'd been hit. That's not fair. No, Andrew agreed. It's not. None of this is fair. That's the point. He hung up before she could say more. The drink sat untouched on his table. Andrew looked at it, at the amber liquid catching lamplight, at the simple geometry of glass and alcohol and choice. He'd told Derek the truth. He wasn't interested in fixing their problems. But now the equation had changed. It wasn't just Frank's pride or Derek's mistakes. His mother's home was on the line. The woman who'd loved him imperfectly but genuinely. Who'd made pot roast every Sunday, even though it was always dry. Who'd remembered his birthday, even if the celebration went sideways. Who called him honey and meant it. Andrew picked up his phone, stared at Tom Hendrick's number. The smart play was obvious. Take the job. Help the competitor expand. Let his family's business fail as a natural consequence of their poor management. His hands would be technically clean, even if the outcome was the same. But his mother would lose her house. Andrew set down the phone, picked up his drink instead, stared out his window at the dark street, at the ordinary houses with ordinary lives inside them, at a world that kept spinning regardless of whether families held together or fell apart. This was the choice then, not between helping and hurting, but between different kinds of damage. He drank, and he started making plans. The meeting with Tom Hendricks had been Thursday. By Friday morning, Andrew had made his decision. Not the decision anyone expected, including himself, until the moment it crystallized. He called Tom first thing, before he could reconsider. Andrew, Tom answered on the second ring. Good to hear from you. You have an answer for me. I do. I appreciate the offer. It's generous, and the opportunity is significant. But I have to decline. Pause on the line. Then, can I ask why? Personal reasons. Related to your family's business? Andrew had expected this question. Partially, but also because I've been thinking about what I actually want to do next, and I don't think working for your company is it. Is there another offer? Not yet, but there will be. Tom laughed, not unkindly. Confident. I like that. Look, if things change, give me a call. The position won't stay open forever, but I'd make room for the right person. I appreciate that. They hung up. Andrew sat at his kitchen table with coffee going cold, looking at the phone, thinking about what he'd just turned down. $95,000. Profit sharing. Director track. He turned it down not because he wanted to help his family, but because he'd realized something in the days since that diner meeting. Helping Tom Hendricks destroy his father's business would feel good for about 10 minutes. It would just feel empty. Andrew didn't want revenge anymore. That required caring too much about Frank's opinion. What Andrew wanted was something cleaner, something that let him sleep at night regardless of what his family thought. He wanted leverage, not to save them, not to fix Derek's mistakes, but to rewrite the terms of engagement completely. At work that morning, Helen stopped by his office. "You look like you're thinking hard about something." "Career planning," Andrew said. "You thinking about moving on?" "Maybe. Eventually." She leaned against his doorframe, arms crossed. "You do well wherever you went. You know that, right? You're one of the best coordinators I've worked with. Don't sell yourself short." "I won't." "Good." She started to leave, turned back. "For what it's worth, if you're looking at starting something of your own, you'd have my endorsement. I know people. I can make introductions." Andrew looked up sharply. "What makes you think I'd start something?" "Because you're too good to keep taking orders forever. Some people are built to run their own show. You're one of them." She left before he could respond. Andrew sat with that for a while. His own show. The idea had been percolating in the back of his mind for months, maybe years. He'd seen how the industry worked, where the inefficiencies were where someone with the right connections and the right approach could carve out space. He pulled up a blank document on his computer and started writing. Not a business plan exactly, more like a thought experiment. What would it take to start his own logistics coordination firm? What would differentiate it? Who would the clients be? By lunch, he had 3 pages of notes. By end of day, he had 7. He didn't go home immediately. Instead, he drove to a coffee shop on the edge of town, ordered black coffee, and spent 2 more hours refining his thinking. The shape of something emerged. A consulting firm focused on mid-sized construction suppliers, offering logistics optimization and vendor relationship management. Companies like his father's, big enough to need sophisticated supply chain solutions, small enough to not have in-house expertise. The market was there. The need was real. Andrew had the credentials, the connections, the knowledge. What he didn't have was capital to start. He'd need $20,000 minimum to get properly established. Office space, insurance, incorporation fees, marketing materials, a buffer for the first few months of inconsistent income. He had maybe $12,000 in savings. Not enough. His phone buzzed. Text from Derek. "Did you take the job?" Andrew stared at the message. Somehow Derek knew he'd decided. Small town. Someone had seen Andrew and Tom at lunch. Word had gotten back. He typed no. 3 dots appeared immediately. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, why not? Andrew didn't answer. Let Derek wonder. Another message. "Does this mean you'll help us?" Andrew typed carefully. "It means I'm considering options. Don't contact me again unless I reach out first." He blocked Derek's number before any response could come. Saturday morning, Andrew woke with the clarity that sometimes comes after a night's sleep has processed complicated problems. He knew what he needed to do. Not the right thing necessarily, but the strategic thing. He called his father. Frank answered with suspicion in his voice. "Andrew, I want to meet. Just you. Not Derek." "Why not Derek?" "Because this conversation is between you and me." Silence. Then, when? "Today. 2 o'clock. Same diner. I'll be there." Frank arrived exactly on time. Andrew was already in a booth with coffee, watching through the window as his father's truck pulled into the lot. Frank climbed out slowly, looking older than he had just days ago. Tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying worry. He slid into the booth across from Andrew without greeting. "Talk," Frank said. "I turned down the job with Hendricks." Frank's expression shifted slightly. Not relief exactly, but something easing around his eyes. "Why?" "Because spite is exhausting and ultimately pointless." "So you're going to help us?" "No." Andrew leaned forward. "I'm not going to help you. I'm going to offer you a deal." "What kind of deal?" "I've been planning to start my own consulting business. Logistics optimization, vendor relationship management, supply chain analysis. I have the expertise. What I don't have is startup capital or initial clients." Frank's eyes narrowed. "You want me to invest in you?" "No. I want you to become my first client. I'll help transition your vendor relationships, restructure your payment terms, clean up Derek's mess." In exchange, you pay me a consulting fee, 20,000 over 6 months. That gives me the capital I need to establish my business properly. 20,000. Plus, I want a guarantee in writing that I'll manage your supply chain for the next 2 years minimum. That gives me credibility with other potential clients. Show them I saved Billings building supply, and doors open. Frank sat back. His jaw worked, chewing over the proposition. So you use our crisis as a stepping stone. Yes. That's cold. I learned from you. Frank's face darkened. Watch it. I'm stating facts. You taught me that sentiment and business don't mix. You taught me to be practical, transactional. This is me being practical. What if I say no? Then your business fails within 6 months. Your vendors will stop shipping, your clients will find other suppliers, and you'll default on the mortgage you took out on the house. Mom loses her home. You spend retirement in an apartment somewhere, living off Social Security, wondering what happened. Frank's hands had curled into fists on the table. You'd let that happen. I'd let the natural consequences of your choices happen. There's a difference. You're my son. Am I? Andrew met his father's eyes without blinking. Because for 35 years you've treated me like an inconvenience. Like someone you tolerated rather than valued. So if I'm your son when you need something, then I was your son at my birthday dinner too. You can't have it both ways. The diner noise filled the silence between them. Coffee machine hissing. Someone laughing at the counter. Classic rock playing low through tinny speakers. Derek said I scared you. Andrew continued. I've been thinking about that. Whether it's true. Whether you saw something in me that made you uncomfortable. And that's why you never warmed to me. That's psychobabble. Maybe. But here's what I know for certain. I stopped caring whether you like me. I stopped trying to earn your approval. I'm offering you a business transaction that benefits both of us. You get to save your company and your house. I get capital and credibility to start my own business. Clean. Professional. No emotion required. Frank stared at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, when did you get so hard? When I realized that being soft got me nothing. More silence. Frank looked out the window at the parking lot, at his truck, at the world beyond the diner's glass. When he looked back, something had changed in his face. Not softening exactly, but recognition. Like he was seeing Andrew clearly for the first time. 20,000 over 6 months, Frank said, plus the 2-year guarantee. Derek won't like this. He'll see it as you taking over. Derek can accept it or find another solution. But we both know there isn't one. Frank nodded slowly. I need to talk to your mother. No, this is your decision. You're the one who put the house at risk. You're the one who let Derek mismanage the accounts. You fix it. I can't make this call without talking to Carolyn. Andrew pulled a manila folder from his bag, slid it across the table. Contract's in there. Standard consulting agreement. I'll need your signature by Monday morning. After that, the offer expires. Frank picked up the folder, opened it, scanned the first page. His lips moved slightly as he read. This is already drawn up. I had a lawyer draft it yesterday. You were that confident I'd say yes. I was confident you'd be practical. Andrew stood. Monday morning, 9 a.m. Bring the signed contract to my office. Address is on the last page. He left Frank sitting in the booth, holding the contract, looking older than 63. Sunday passed quietly. Andrew half expected his mother to call, but his phone stayed silent. He spent the day cleaning his house, doing laundry, ordinary tasks that felt like meditation. Evening came and went. No word from anyone. Monday morning, 8:45, Andrew sat at his desk, doing actual work, trying not to watch the clock. Helen had asked no questions when he'd requested to work from his office all morning, canceling 2 site visits. 8:55. Still nothing. 9 o'clock. His door opened. Frank stood there with a manila folder in his hand. He looked like he hadn't slept well. He walked into Andrew's office without asking permission and dropped the folder on the desk. Signed, Frank said. All pages initialed where your lawyer indicated. Andrew opened the folder, checked the signatures. Everything in order. Good. I'll start transition work this week. First payment is due in 30 days. Frank didn't move. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at Andrew with an expression that was impossible to read. You know what you're doing, Frank said. Not a question. Yes. This doesn't make us square. I'm not trying to make us square. I'm trying to move forward without baggage. There's always baggage with family. Andrew closed the folder. Then maybe we should think of this as a business relationship instead. Something flickered across Frank's face. Hurt, maybe, or recognition, or both. He nodded once and turned to leave. At the door he stopped. Your mother wants to see you. For what it's worth. I'll call her when I'm ready. Frank left without another word. Andrew sat in his office afterward, holding the signed contract, feeling the weight of what he'd just set in motion. This was leverage, real and tangible. This was power not given but taken. This was the beginning of something new. He picked up his phone and called Helen. You said you knew people. I'm ready for those introductions. The work began immediately. Andrew showed up at Billings Building Supply Tuesday morning with a laptop bag and a legal pad, walking through the front door for the first time in maybe 3 years. The place looked exactly like he remembered. Warehouse stretching back into shadows, office area cramped and cluttered with decades of paperwork, that particular smell of lumber and dust and motor oil. Derek was at the front desk, and his face went through several expressions when he saw Andrew. Surprise, confusion, anger, something that might have been relief. What are you doing here? Derek asked. Working. Where's the accounting office? Andrew, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to do a job. Dad signed a contract. Where's the accounting office? Derek pointed mutely to a door in the back. The accountant was a woman in her late 50s named Barbara who looked both stressed and relieved to see someone taking charge. Andrew spent 4 hours with her going through the books, mapping out exactly where the problems were. Derek had extended credit to 8 new clients without proper vetting. 4 were legitimate but slow paying. 3 were basically insolvent. 1 had skipped town entirely. Did you run credit checks? Andrew asked. Barbara shook her head. Derek said he knew these people personally. Said checks weren't necessary. Did Frank approve this? He signs what Derek puts in front of him. Andrew made notes. The situation was worse than Frank had admitted, but not unfixable. It would require careful negotiation with vendors, restructured payment plans with clients, and possibly writing off some losses entirely. He worked late into the evening, building spreadsheets, mapping relationships, identifying leverage points. Derek checked on him once around 6, lingering in the doorway like he wanted to say something, ultimately leaving without speaking. Frank never appeared at all. Wednesday morning, Andrew started making calls. He knew most of these vendors personally from his own work, had negotiated contracts with them, had shared meals at industry conferences, had built relationships based on mutual respect and reliability. Jim, it's Andrew Billings. How are you? Good. Listen, I'm calling about Billings Building Supply. I know you've had some payment issues with them recently. No, I'm not making excuses. I'm calling because I've been hired to restructure their accounts, and I wanted to reach out personally to work out terms. Right, exactly. Here's what I'm proposing. The conversations went better than expected. Andrew's reputation carried weight. When people heard he was involved, they were willing to negotiate, willing to extend grace they wouldn't have offered otherwise. By Friday, he'd restructured payment terms with 5 major vendors. By the end of the second week, 7. Derek's mess was slowly being untangled. Derek himself was a ghost in the building. He came in early and left late, avoiding Andrew whenever possible. When they did cross paths, Derek would nod stiffly and keep walking. Frank appeared in the accounting office doorway 3 weeks into the project. Andrew was working on a particularly complicated vendor negotiation, typing emails while on hold with a supplier. Got a minute? Frank asked. Not really. Barbara says you're making progress. That's what you're paying me for. Frank stepped into the office, closed the door behind him. Derek's been asking questions about what happens when this project is done, whether you'll keep managing things. Andrew hung up the phone. That's not part of our agreement. He's worried you're trying to take over the business. I'm not. I'm fixing his mistakes, and then I'm starting my own company. With our money. With my fees, Andrew corrected. There's a difference. Frank sat down heavily in the chair across from Barbara's desk. He looked tired in a deeper way than before. Not just lack of sleep, but something more fundamental. I don't know how to talk to you anymore. We're talking right now. You know what I mean. Ever since you were a kid, I didn't... I couldn't figure out how to reach you. You were so quiet, so internal. Everything I said seemed to bounce off you wrong. Andrew set down his pen. You want to have this conversation now? I don't know when else we have it. How about 30 years ago? 20 years ago? 10? Frank's jaw tightened. I'm trying here, and I'm working. If you want to discuss our relationship, make an appointment. Right now I'm busy cleaning up a mess I didn't make. That mess is my livelihood, my legacy. Then you should have managed it better. Frank stood abruptly, chair scraping. His face had gone red. You think you're so much smarter than everyone else. I don't think I'm smarter. I think I'm more careful. I think I plan. I think I don't let ego and favoritism make my decisions for me. Watch your mouth. Or what? You'll kick me out? Go ahead. Your vendors will stop shipping again within a week. Your clients will scatter. And you'll still owe me for the work I've already done. They stared at each other across the small office. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Frank spoke quietly, dangerously. You're enjoying this. I'm surviving this. There's a difference. He walked out, slamming the door hard enough that Barbara's wall calendar fell off its hook. Andrew picked up the phone and continued working. 6 months passed in a rhythm of work and distance. Andrew restructured Billings Building Supply's entire vendor network, implemented new accounting procedures, even negotiated better contracts with several major clients. The business stabilized, then grew slightly. The house was no longer at risk. Frank paid every invoice on time. They barely spoke. Derek eventually started talking to Andrew again, mostly about work, always carefully neutral. Once he said, "You're good at this," Andrew had just nodded and moved on to the next task. Carolyn called occasionally. Andrew answered about half the time. They talked about weather, about her garden, about anything except the family. It was cordial and hollow, but it was something. Andrew used the consulting fees to establish Billings Logistics Solutions. Irony not lost on him. Using his father's name to build something separate. He registered the business, rented small office space, built a website, started reaching out to potential clients. Helen had been true to her word about introductions. Andrew met with executives at mid-sized construction firms, suppliers who needed help optimizing their operations, companies looking to expand but lacking internal logistics expertise. His first non-family client signed in month 4, a regional lumber supplier looking to break into new markets. Second client came in month 5. By month 6, Andrew had 4 active clients plus the ongoing work with his father's business. The 2-year contract with Billings Building Supply gave him exactly the credibility he'd anticipated. When potential clients asked for references, he could point to the company he'd saved. When they asked about experience, he could show concrete results. Derek called him once around month 8. "I wanted to say thank you. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you. This wasn't about you," Andrew said. "I know. That's what makes it worse somehow." They didn't speak again for months after that. Andrew hired his first employee, a young logistics coordinator named Jamie who just graduated with a supply chain degree and was hungry to learn. Then a second, an accountant named Robert who'd worked at a firm that downsized. Billings Logistics Solutions grew. Not explosively, but steadily, sustainably. Andrew worked 70-hour weeks, but it felt different than working for someone else. This was his decisions, his reputation, his future. A year after that birthday dinner, Andrew drove past his parents' house one evening. It was autumn again, the same season, same slant of light cutting through trees along the river. He could see lights on in the dining room. Could imagine them sitting at that table, same spots they'd occupied for decades. He didn't stop, not out of anger anymore, not even really out of hurt, just because that wasn't where he belonged. Some families don't change. They just teach you when to walk away. Andrew kept driving toward his own apartment, his own life, his own future built on terms he dictated rather than accepted. The business phone rang. He answered it hands-free, turning down the volume on the radio. "Billings Logistics Solutions, this is Andrew. A potential client. Wanted to discuss optimization strategies for a mid-Atlantic expansion." Andrew pulled into a parking lot, grabbed his pad, and took notes. By the time the call ended, he had another consultation scheduled for next week. He sat in the parking lot afterward as night settled completely, looking at his notes, thinking about how far he'd come. Not through forgiveness or reconciliation or any of the things people claimed families needed. Through leverage, through strategy, through refusing to play the role they'd assigned him. The quiet one, they'd called him, like it was weakness. They were wrong. The quiet one had just been waiting, learning, planning, building something they couldn't touch, couldn't diminish, couldn't take away. Andrew started his car and drove home. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Thinking of you. Hope you're well." He read it, considered responding, decided not to. Maybe someday, maybe not. Either way, it was his choice now, and that made all the difference.